I knelt there, on the cold stone floor of a church I never thought I'd set foot in again, tears streaming down my face as I clutched a small wooden crucifix I'd found in my father's shirt pocket. That moment changed everything. It changed who I was, what I believed, the entire course of my life. But to understand how I got there, I need to go back and tell this story from the beginning. My name is Andrew. I'm 42, and for a long time I considered myself a man of science. I'm an engineer, a graduate of the top university in the country, with a master's degree from abroad and a solid career built on facts, figures, and evidence. I always believed that everything in life had a logical explanation, that there was no mystery human reason couldn't unravel. God, spirituality, miracles? To me, it was all just the product of the imagination of people who couldn't accept the raw reality of facts. I grew up in a traditional family, where my father, John, was a simple but deeply religious man. He worked as a carpenter, his hands calloused from hard work, but he never missed Sunday Mass. I remember him kneeling beside his bed every night, praying the rosary with a devotion that I, as a child, found excessive. My mother, Mary, was equally devout, always with a prayer on her lips and a candle lit for some saint. As a teenager, I started questioning all of that. I saw my parents struggling financially, working hard, enduring hardship, and yet maintaining an unwavering faith. It didn't make sense to me. If God existed and loved them so much, why did he allow them to suffer? Why didn't he help them? These questions distanced me more and more from religion, and when I left home to study in the state capital, I left behind not only the small town where I was born, but also any vestiges of faith I might have had. At university, I immersed myself in the academic world. Every theorem, every formula, every experiment reinforced my conviction that science had all the answers. I graduated with top marks, got a scholarship to study abroad, and when I returned to the US, I quickly established myself as one of the most respected engineers in my field. I built a brilliant career, married a wonderful woman, Fernanda, and we had two beautiful children, Gabriel and Sophia. Life was perfect, or at least that's what I believed. I had professional success, a beautiful family, a comfortable home, luxury cars, international travel, everything a man could want. But there was something that bothered me deeply, my parents' insistence on trying to reconvert me. Whenever I visited them, my father would try to talk about religion, my mother would insist that I take the children to church, and I would always respond with scientific arguments, trying to prove that they were wasting their time with superstitions. I remember one particularly heated argument I had with my father about 3 years ago. He had just come out of a doctor's appointment where he received a diagnosis of a heart problem. It was serious but manageable with medication and lifestyle changes. When I arrived at his house to find out how the appointment had gone, I found him praying in his room, thanking God for being alive and asking for strength to face the treatment. "Dad, you need to stop this," I said, entering the room. "God isn't going to cure your heart. The doctors, the medicine, science will do that." He looked at me with those tired but peaceful eyes and said, "Son, I know you don't believe it, but one day you'll understand. Sometimes life puts us in situations that science can't explain." I laughed with that arrogance that only ignorance can provide. "Dad, you're sick. Your reasoning ability is compromised. There's nothing science can't explain." The words came out of my mouth like daggers, and I saw the pain in his eyes. But my conviction was so strong, my certainty so absolute, that I didn't care about the suffering I was causing. I thought I was being rational, logical, that I was helping him see reality. Over the next 2 years, our relationship became increasingly distant. I continued to visit them, but there was always this tension in the air. My father never tried to talk about religion with me again, and I interpreted this as a victory of reason over superstition. How wrong I was. 6 months ago, I received a call from my mother. She was crying so hard she could barely speak. "Andrew, your father had a heart attack. He's in the hospital, in critical condition." My world collapsed. I dropped everything and rushed to the town where they lived. When I arrived at the hospital, I found my father unconscious in the ICU, hooked up to several machines, with a pale face and a frail appearance that broke my heart. The doctors were blunt. The chances of recovery were minimal. His heart had suffered severe damage, and even if he woke up, his quality of life would be severely compromised. They suggested that the family prepare for the worst. At that moment, all my scientific arrogance crumbled. I was a man of science. I knew the facts. I understood the numbers, but I couldn't accept that my father could die. I spent days at the hospital, taking turns with my mother and siblings. Fernanda came with the children, and seeing Gabriel and Sophia looking at their grandfather in that state destroyed me inside. They kept asking when Grandpa was going to wake up, and I didn't know what to answer. How do you explain to a child that the science I so believed in couldn't save the person they loved most? It was during one of those long nights at the hospital that something strange happened. I was alone in the room with my father, around 3 a.m., and the only sound was the rhythmic beeping of the machines. I was reading some cardiology research papers on my tablet, trying to find something the doctors might have missed, some experimental treatment, anything that could offer hope. Suddenly, I heard my father whisper something. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but I leaned closer and could hear clearly. He was praying. He had been unconscious for days, but he was praying. It wasn't rambling or delirium induced by medication. It was a perfect, clear prayer, as if he were fully conscious. I called the nurse, who rushed in. She checked his vital signs and was astonished. "This is impossible," she murmured. "According to his parameters, he should be in a deep coma." She called the doctor on duty, who ran a series of tests. All indicators showed my father was unconscious, but he continued to pray, softly, almost a whisper. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat there, beside his bed, listening to my father pray. It was as if he were in a state between life and death, between consciousness and unconsciousness, but his faith remained intact. For the first time in my adult life, I began to question whether I really knew everything. The next morning, my mother arrived early at the hospital. When she saw my father still praying, she wasn't surprised. "He always does that," she said simply. "In the most difficult moments, he always turns to prayer." She knelt beside the bed and began to pray with him. I watched them, trying to understand what was happening. "Mom, this isn't normal," I said. "He's unconscious, but he's praying. Science can't explain this." She looked at me with that serene smile I'd known since childhood. "Son, not everything needs to be explained by science. Some things just are." Over the next few days, other family members began to arrive. Uncles, cousins, friends from the community. Everyone came to pray for my father. The hospital room transformed into a small chapel, with people constantly coming and going, each leaving a prayer, a word of comfort, a bit of hope. I watched all of this with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. Part of me still believed it was just a coincidence, that my father would eventually wake up because the medication was working. But there was something in the air, an energy I couldn't explain, a feeling that something bigger was happening. If you're enjoying this story and want to continue following accounts like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Experiences like this need to be shared because we never know when someone needs to hear exactly what we've lived through. It was on the 5th day that everything changed. I was again alone with my father during the early morning hours when he stopped praying. The silence was so sudden that it startled me. I checked the machines, called the nurse, but everything was normal. He had simply stopped praying and was now sleeping in absolute silence. The next morning, when the doctor made his rounds, he noticed something different. "His vital signs are improving," he said, incredulous. "This is unusual." He ordered a series of tests, and the results were surprising. The heart that was almost failing was now beating stronger. His blood pressure had stabilized. His blood oxygen levels were better than they had been since the heart attack. "Doctor, is this normal?" I asked, trying to maintain my scientific rationality. He shook his head. "Honestly, no. Based on the initial parameters, we didn't expect this recovery. It happens sometimes, of course, but it's rare, very rare." At that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Doubt. Not doubt about the scientific facts, but doubt about whether I truly understood everything that was happening. Were there variables I wasn't considering? Were there forces at play that science couldn't yet measure? 2 days later, my father opened his eyes. I was there, along with my mother, when he woke up. The first thing he did was smile. Not a weak smile from someone recovering from a severe heart attack, but a full, life-filled smile. "Thank you, God," were the first words he said. The doctor was speechless. "This is extraordinary," he repeated. "Given the damage to his heart, we didn't expect him to regain consciousness with such clarity." He ran more tests, and the results continued to be surprising. His heart was functioning better than the doctors had predicted. Over the following days, as my father recovered, we had many conversations. He told me that during the time he was unconscious, he had experiences he couldn't explain. He said he felt like he was in a place of great peace, where there was no pain or suffering, but that he knew it wasn't yet his time to leave. "Son," he said in one of these conversations, "I know you don't believe it, but I felt God's presence. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't delirium. It was real, more real than anything I've ever experienced." I wanted to argue, to offer scientific explanations for what he had experienced, but something inside me had changed. Perhaps it was the relief of having him back. Perhaps it was the inexplicability of his recovery. But I could no longer completely dismiss the possibility that there was something beyond science. When my father was discharged from the hospital a week later, the doctors remained perplexed. They called his recovery remarkable and statistically improbable. He returned home with a quality of life no one expected, practically without any sequelae from the heart attack. Then my mother handed me something that would change my perspective forever. It was a small box she'd kept all these years. Inside, a simple, worn wooden crucifix. "Your father always carried this in his pocket," she said, "ever since you were little. He said it was his protection." I held the crucifix in my hands, feeling a strange sensation. It was just a piece of wood, without material value, but there was something about it that deeply touched me. My mother continued. "When he was admitted, they took it from his pocket, along with his other belongings. I kept it, thinking he'd want it when he woke up." At that moment, something broke inside me. All my certainties, all my scientific arrogance, my conviction that I had all the answers, crumbled at once. I started to cry, not out of sadness, but an emotion I couldn't name. It was as if a part of me that had been dormant for decades had awakened. "Mom," I managed to say through my tears, "I think I was wrong. I think I was wrong about everything." She hugged me, and in that embrace, I felt all the love and patience she'd held back during all those years of my criticisms and skepticism. "Son, you were never wrong about science. You just hadn't understood yet that science and faith can walk hand in hand." In the following days, I began to reflect on everything that had happened. I talked to Fernanda, who always respected my convictions but had never fully shared my skepticism. She told me that she had prayed for my father every day, even knowing I wouldn't approve. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I asked. "Because I knew you wouldn't understand," she replied. "But I also knew you'd discover it on your own one day." I started reading about spirituality, about the relationship between science and faith, about cases of inexplicable recoveries. I discovered that many renowned scientists were deeply religious people who saw science as a way of understanding divine creation. I discovered that science didn't have all the answers, that there were mysteries that might never be solved by human reason. But the real transformation happened one Sunday afternoon, 3 weeks after my father's discharge. I was walking through the town where I grew up, reminiscing about childhood moments, when I passed by the church where my parents always took me as a child. I don't know what compelled me, but I decided to go inside. The church interior was empty, lit only by the natural light streaming through the stained glass windows. I sat in one of the back pews and sat there in silence, trying to organize my thoughts. That's when I felt the crucifix my mother had given me in my pocket.